Please,
Old
officer,
man.
I didn't do anything
Don't make me
wrong.
drag your
No,
sorry
you're
ass
under
out of
arrest.
here.
No.
The voice cut through the cemetery silence like a blade through silk. Officer Ryker's boots crunched on the gravel path, each step deliberate, each step closer to the kneeling figure hunched before a white marble headstone. The drizzle had turned the grass dark, made the graves look fresh even when they weren't. The air smelled of wet earth and stone. Isaiah Freeman didn't move. His shoulders stayed bent. His hands clutched something small and metallic against his chest. The rain had soaked through his jacket, an old, shapeless thing that might have been green once, but now looked like the color of nothing. His pants were stained at the knees. His boots, if you could call them that, were held together with what looked like duct tape. He could have been anyone. He could have been invisible. Ryker stopped 3 feet away, hand resting on his belt near his sidearm. He tilted his head, assessing, judging. You deaf or just stupid? Ryker's voice carried that particular edge, the kind sharpened by years of assuming authority meant superiority. Cemeteries closed. You got no business being here after hours. Freeman's lips moved, barely audible. Something about a son, something about permission. Ryker laughed, short and sharp. Permission? Look at you. You look like you just crawled out of a cardboard box. He stepped closer, close enough now that his shadow fell across the headstone. Close enough to see what Freeman was holding, a medal, tarnished and rain-slicked. What's that, huh? You steal that from one of these graves? That what you're doing out here? The old man's fingers tightened around the medal. His voice came low, controlled. I'm visiting my son, officer. I have clearance from the groundskeeper. 2. Ryker's boot shot out. Not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to humiliate. It connected with Freeman's shin. I said, get up. Stop playing the victim card. You people always got some sob story, don't you? Some excuse why you're where you shouldn't be. Freeman rose slowly, unfolding from the ground like something ancient and deliberate. Even hunched, even rain-soaked, there was something in the way he stood that should have registered as wrong, should have made Ryker hesitate. But Ryker saw only what he wanted to see, an old black man in rags, alone, at the mercy of a badge and a gun. I'm giving you one chance, Freeman said quietly. His eyes stayed level, fixed on Ryker's face with an intensity that didn't match the shabby exterior. Walk away. Call your supervisor. Check my identification before you do something you'll regret. Ryker's grin widened. Regret? The only thing I'm going to regret is not cuffing you sooner. He reached out, fingers closing around the metal in Freeman's hand, and yanked it free. Held it up to the fading light. Medal of Honor? Please. Where'd you buy this? Amazon? He turned it over, mockingly examining it. This is federal property, old man. You just graduated from trespassing to felony theft. And then, with deliberate cruelty, Ryker dropped the medal. Let it fall into the mud at their feet. Let it sink into the wet earth beside the grave of the boy who'd earned it. Freeman's jaw tightened. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something colder, something bottomless. That was your last warning, son. Ryker laughed again, already reaching for his handcuffs. My last warning? That's cute, real cute. Tell you what, you can explain all about your little panhandling operation down at the station. The graves stretched in perfect rows behind them, white stones catching what little light remained. Each marker identical, each life reduced to name and date and rank. American flags hung limp in the drizzle, fabric heavy with rain. This wasn't just land. This was consecrated ground, paid for in blood, earned through sacrifice. The kind of place where voices naturally lowered, where even the irreverent found reverence. Ryker saw none of it. He grabbed Freeman's arm, fingers digging in through the wet fabric. I said move. You want me to add resisting arrest to the charges? Freeman's voice came steady, almost gentle. Officer, I'm asking you again. My name is Isaiah Freeman. I have written authorization from the cemetery administrator to be here after hours. My son is buried here. That medal you just threw in the mud that belonged to him. The word should have landed, should have registered. A father visiting his son's grave. A Medal of Honor recipient. The highest military decoration the nation could bestow. But Ryker's worldview had already been constructed, its walls too thick for facts to penetrate. Your son. Ryker's tone dripped with theatrical skepticism. Right. And I'm supposed to believe some homeless guy wandering around after dark has a son buried in a national cemetery? You probably don't even know whose grave that is. Probably just picked one at random to run your little scam. Freeman turned his head slightly, looking past Ryker toward the rows of white stones. Staff Sergeant Marcus Freeman, killed in action, Helmand Province, Afghanistan, 2019. He was 23 years old. His voice didn't waver, didn't break. He threw himself on a grenade to save his squad. 7 men went home to their families because my son didn't. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Ryker's face. Not shame, too early for that, too buried beneath layers of assumption and prejudice, but uncertainty. A hairline crack in the certainty. It sealed over immediately. Great story, Ryker said, already spinning Freeman around, forcing his arms behind his back. Real touching. You practice that? You probably tell that to every cop who catches you trespassing. Oh, officer, my son the war hero. My son the Medal of Honor recipient. Meanwhile, you're out here looking like you just crawled out of a refugee camp, trying to steal from the dead. The handcuffs came out, metal gleaming wet. Freeman didn't resist as Ryker wrenched his wrists together. Didn't fight as the cuffs clicked shut. But his voice, when it came, had changed. Lower now, colder. I'm going to say this one final time, officer. In the inner pocket of my jacket is a satellite phone and military identification. I strongly suggest you examine both before you proceed any further with this arrest. Ryker shoved him forward, toward the patrol car parked on the access road. Satellite phone? Military ID? Let me guess you're actually a general in disguise, right? Testing how the little people get treated? He laughed, the sound harsh against the cemetery's quiet dignity. I've heard every excuse in the book, old man. You're just another con artist who thought a uniformed cemetery would be an easy mark. Freeman said nothing. He walked where Ryker pushed him, steady and controlled, while behind them the Medal of Honor lay half buried in the mud beside his son's grave. Here's what's going to happen, Ryker continued, voice rising with the satisfaction of authority unchallenged. You're going downtown. We're going to run your prints assuming you're even in the system. We're going to charge you with trespassing, theft of federal property, and whatever else I feel like adding. And tomorrow morning you're going to stand in front of a judge and explain why you thought dressing up like a bum and disrespecting a military cemetery was a good idea. He slammed Freeman against the hood of the patrol car, face pressed to the wet metal, began roughly searching his pockets. And that Medal of Honor knockoff? That's evidence now, going straight into an evidence locker. Maybe they'll melt it down, turn it into something useful. Freeman's eyes closed briefly. When they opened again, they held something Ryker was too arrogant to recognize. Pity. Ryker's hands moved through Freeman's pockets with the casual violation of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Wallet first. He pulled it free, flipped it open, expecting to find nothing, maybe a fake ID, maybe an EBT card, maybe just emptiness. The leather was worn, but quality. Military issue. Inside, no cash, no credit cards, just a single identification card in a clear plastic sleeve. Ryker pulled it out, angled it toward the fading light. His eyes scanned the text, once, twice. The color drained from his face like water through a sieve, then rushed back in a flood of red. What the hell is this? His voice climbed an octave. General Isaiah Freeman, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? He thrust the card toward Freeman's face, still pressed against the hood. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know a fake ID when I see one? Freeman's voice came muffled against the metal. That card is genuine. The phone in my jacket's inner pocket has a direct line to the Pentagon. I suggest you use it. Riker stared at the card, at the Department of Defense seal, at the holographic security features that shifted in the light. For a moment, just a moment, doubt crept in. The card looked real, felt real. The weight of it, the material, the printing quality, not something you could get made at a strip mall. Then his jaw set. His pride, his certainty, his absolute conviction that the world worked the way he'd always believed it worked, all of it rushed back in like a tide filling a breach. Nice try. He shoved the card into his own pocket. Real nice try. Where'd you get this made? Must have cost you what, $50? 100? He hauled Freeman upright, spun him around to face him. You're not just a thief now. You're impersonating a military officer. That's a federal crime, old man. That's serious time. Freeman's eyes locked onto Riker's. No anger, no fear, just a terrible, bottomless calm. Officer Ryker, his gaze had dropped briefly to the nameplate. I am going to give you one final opportunity to stop this. Call your supervisor. Call the duty officer at the nearest military installation. Give them my name and service number. It's on that card you just pocketed. I don't need to call anyone. Riker's hand went to his service weapon, not drawing it but resting there. A threat, a reminder of who held the power here. I am the law in this county. Me, not you, not some fake general card, not the Pentagon. Me. He grabbed the front of Freeman's jacket, pulled him close enough that Freeman could smell the coffee on his breath, the aftershave, the certainty. You know what I think? I think you're a con artist who preys on military sympathy. I think you get these fake medals, these fake IDs, and you go around cemeteries looking for soft touches. Well, you picked the wrong cemetery and the wrong cop. Freeman's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. I'm asking you, as a fellow American, to reconsider. What you're doing right now, it will destroy your life, your career, your freedom, all of it, gone. I'm trying to save you from yourself. Riker laughed, loud and harsh. Save me? You're in handcuffs, old man. You're about to spend the night in lockup, and tomorrow when they arraign you, I'm going to be there to watch you try to explain this to a judge. He reached down, grabbed the Medal of Honor from where it lay in the mud, held it up between them, water dripping from the ribbon. This symbol of honor that real heroes died for, you don't deserve to touch it. And then, with deliberate cruelty, he threw it. Not just dropped it, threw it. The medal arced through the air and landed somewhere in the grass between graves, lost in the gathering darkness. Freeman's expression didn't change, didn't shift, but something happened behind his eyes, something final and irrevocable. A door closing, a decision made. That, Freeman said quietly, was your last mistake. Riker's grin widened. Yeah? What are you going to do about it? He grabbed Freeman's arm, started dragging him toward the patrol car. You're done warning me, old man. Now you get to shut up and... He stopped. Freeman wasn't moving. Not resisting exactly, just not moving, like trying to drag a boulder. There was strength in that old frame, strength Riker hadn't anticipated. I said move! Riker yanked harder, frustration bleeding into his voice. Freeman turned his head slightly, just enough to meet Riker's eyes. Look at my wrist. What? My left wrist, the watch. Riker glanced down, irritated. There was a watch there, visible now that Freeman's sleeve had ridden up. Not a regular watch, military grade. Digital display showing not just time but coordinates, elevation, heart rate, and something else, a small red light blinking steadily. What about it? Freeman's voice remained perfectly level. When my heart rate exceeds a certain threshold for more than 60 seconds without a security override code, that watch activates an emergency protocol. It's designed to protect high-value military personnel from kidnapping or assassination. Riker stared at him. You're insane. The protocol is called Sparta. You have approximately 45 seconds before it triggers a full response from the nearest military rapid reaction force. Freeman paused. I'm not trying to threaten you, officer. I'm trying to warn you. You can still stop this. Enter the override code. Call the Pentagon. But you need to decide right now. For 3 heartbeats, Ryker stood frozen. The watch blinked. The drizzle continued. The cemetery lay silent around them. Then Ryker's face twisted into a sneer. You're bluffing. You're a crazy old man with a fake watch and a fake story, and I'm done listening. He shoved Freeman toward the car, reaching for his door handle. And in the distance, so faint at first that it might have been imagination, came a sound. A rhythmic thumping, growing louder. The sound grew louder, but Ryker's hands were already moving. Training, muscle memory, the practiced motion of someone who'd made hundreds of arrests and never once questioned his authority to do so. He wrenched Freeman's arms behind his back, twisting the old man's wrists together with unnecessary force. Resisting arrest, Ryker announced, as if speaking for a recording. Suspect attempting to intimidate an officer with false threats. The handcuffs came out again, heavier than the first pair. Figure-8 cuffs designed to immobilize completely, the kind used on violent offenders. Freeman didn't struggle, didn't fight, but his voice cut through the growing sound above them. You're making a strategic error, son, the kind that ends careers, ends lives. Shut up. Ryker clicked the cuffs tight, tighter than necessary, metal biting into skin. He grabbed Freeman by the back of the neck and slammed him forward against the hood of the patrol car. The old man's cheek pressed against hot metal, breath fogging the wet surface. You don't get to talk anymore. You don't get to threaten. You're under arrest. The thumping overhead was unmistakable now. Helicopter rotors. But Ryker was too focused, too committed to the trajectory he'd set in motion. Police helicopters flew over this area all the time. Life flight used this corridor. It meant nothing. Freeman's voice came strained but steady. In my jacket, inner left pocket, there's a satellite phone, military-grade encryption, direct line to the Pentagon Operations Center. I'm invoking my right as a flag officer to contact my chain of command. Ryker barked a laugh. The sound came out wild, almost manic. Pentagon? Sure thing, General. He patted Freeman down roughly, hands moving over the soaked jacket. I'll let you call the president, too. Maybe Santa Claus. How about that? His fingers found the wallet again, the one he'd already searched. He pulled it free, held it in front of Freeman's face. This fake ID? This is Exhibit A. Evidence of impersonating a federal officer. That's 10 years minimum, old man. 10 years in a federal prison where they really don't like people who disrespect the military. Freeman's breathing remained controlled despite the pressure on his back, despite the rain, despite the metal cutting into his wrists. Officer Ryker, I need you to listen very carefully. That watch on my left wrist is not a civilian device. It monitors vital signs. When my heart rate indicates distress without proper authentication codes, it triggers an automatic response protocol. More stories. Ryker flipped the wallet open again, staring at the ID card. The seal looked so real. The hologram shifted in the light. For a fraction of a second, doubt crept back in. What if? No, he crushed the thought. Con artists had access to quality equipment now. The internet made everything available. This was just another scam, another attempt to intimidate law enforcement. You want to know what I think? Ryker leaned down, his mouth close to Freeman's ear. I think you're a pathetic old man who bought some fake credentials online. I think you came to this cemetery to steal from graves, maybe flowers, maybe flags. Maybe you were looking for credit card numbers from mourners. And when you got caught, you pulled out your little costume and hoped I'd be too stupid or too scared to do my job. He straightened, tucked the wallet into his own pocket alongside the ID card. Evidence. All evidence. Well, guess what? I'm not stupid. And I'm not scared of some homeless guy with delusions of grandeur. The rotor sound was louder now, much louder. But Ryker was already moving, already reaching for his radio to call in the arrest, already planning how he'd write this up in his report, already seeing himself as the hero who hadn't been fooled, who'd upheld the law despite intimidation tactics. Freeman's eyes closed briefly. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that should have registered as wrong. I tried to warn you. I tried to give you every opportunity to stop. What happens next? You brought this on yourself. What happens next, Ryker said, yanking Freeman upright and spinning him around, is you go in the back of my car, you ride to the station, and you spend the night in a cell thinking about how badly you screwed up. The wind was picking up. Not natural wind, rotor wash, strong enough now to make the flags surrounding the cemetery snap and billow, strong enough to send rain horizontal. Ryker looked up for the first time, really looked. His face went white. Two black shapes descended from the sky. Not police helicopters, not life flight. These were UH-60 Blackhawks, military transport birds, their hulls painted in flat tactical gray that seemed to absorb what little light remained. They came in low and fast, rotors thundering, their approach coordinated with mathematical precision. The kind of precision that spoke of countless combat insertions, countless hot extractions. Ryker stood frozen, one hand still gripping Freeman's arm, the other hovering near his sidearm. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The helicopters didn't circle, didn't announce themselves. They simply arrived, dropping altitude until they hovered 30 feet above the cemetery grounds, rotor wash turning the drizzle into a horizontal spray. The sound was overwhelming, a physical force that made speech impossible, that made thought difficult. Spotlights ignited. Brilliant white beams that turned night into noon, that pinned Ryker and Freeman in circles of blinding luminescence. Ryker threw up one hand to shield his eyes, squinting against the glare. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker, amplified to cut through the rotor noise. Male, authoritative, absolutely unyielding. This is United States Military Police. The individual in handcuffs is a flag officer of the United States Armed Forces. Release him immediately and step away from the vehicle. Ryker's hand fell away from Freeman's arm as if burned. He staggered backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. His face had gone beyond pale into something gray, bloodless. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Freeman remained exactly where he was, standing beside the patrol car, handcuffed, rain-soaked, looking like nothing had changed. But his eyes had shifted upward, tracking the helicopters with the calm assessment of someone who'd been in similar situations before. From the other side, the Black Hawks maintained their hover, downdraft, flattening the grass around graves, sending water sheeting off marble headstones. And then the side doors slid open. Fast ropes deployed, thick black cables dropping to the ground. Figures emerged from the helicopter bays, not sliding down, but rappelling with practiced speed. They hit the ground in perfect synchronization. 8 men from each bird, 16 total. They wore full tactical gear, helmets with night vision mounts, plate carriers heavy with equipment, rifles held at low ready. The patches on their shoulders showed a simple eagle over crossed arrows. Military Police Special Reaction Team. They fanned out immediately, establishing a perimeter around Ryker and Freeman with the efficiency of men who'd done this in far more dangerous places than a cemetery in rural America. Red laser dots appeared on Ryker's chest, 1, then 3, then too many to count. Every rifle in the formation had found him, marked him, made him a target. The team leader approached, moving with controlled urgency. He was shorter than the others, but carried himself with unmistakable command authority. His rifle stayed pointed at the ground, but his hand rested on it in a way that suggested it could come up in a fraction of a second. Officer. His voice cut through the rotor wash without shouting. Projection, not volume. Step away from General Freeman. Do it now. Riker's knees buckled. He caught himself against the patrol car, one hand pressed to the hood for support. I, this is, I'm a police officer. I'm conducting a lawful, you are assaulting the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The team leader's tone didn't rise, didn't heat. That made it more terrifying. You have 5 seconds to release him before this becomes a federal incident. 1. Wait, I can explain. 2. He didn't show me any. 3. Riker's hands shook as he fumbled for his keys. The handcuff key slipped from his fingers, bounced on the wet pavement. He dropped to his knees, scrambling for it, breath coming in gasps that had nothing to do with exertion. 4. He found the key, lurched upright, nearly dropped it again. His hands wouldn't work properly. The key scraped against the handcuff mechanism, missing the lock. The team leader's hand moved to his rifle. 5. The handcuffs clicked open. Freeman brought his hands forward slowly, rubbing his wrists where the metal had cut into skin. He didn't speak, didn't look at Ryker, just stood there in the spotlight, in the rotor wash, perfectly still. The team leader stepped forward, positioning himself between Freeman and Ryker like a human shield. General Freeman, sir, are you injured? Freeman's voice, when it came, was quiet enough that Ryker had to strain to hear it over the helicopters. I'm fine, Lieutenant, a bit wet, nothing permanent. Sir, we received your emergency beacon. Full tactical response was authorized. The lieutenant's eyes never left Ryker. What are your orders? Freeman looked down at his hands, at the red marks circling his wrists, then past the lieutenant to where Ryker knelt on the ground, patrol car at his back, surrounded by soldiers who could end him with a radio call. My son's Medal of Honor, Freeman said. He threw it into the grass. I'd like it recovered. Yes, sir. The lieutenant made a hand signal. 2 soldiers immediately broke formation, producing flashlights, beginning a search pattern through the cemetery grounds. Freeman turned finally to face Ryker. The old man's expression held no anger, no satisfaction, just a terrible, tired sadness. You had so many chances to stop, Freeman said. Riker's voice came out strangled, desperate. This is a mistake, a huge mistake. I was just doing my job. He looked like, anyone would have checked identification when requested, Freeman interrupted, voice still quiet. Anyone would have made a phone call to verify. Anyone would have hesitated before assaulting a man at his son's grave. The team leader's radio crackled. A voice came through, clipped and professional. Groundhawk Actual, this is Overwatch. We have local law enforcement units responding to your position. ETA 4 minutes. How do you want to handle? The lieutenant glanced at Freeman, waiting. Freeman's jaw tightened. Tell them to stand down. This is now a military jurisdiction matter. Copy that, sir. The lieutenant spoke into his radio, issuing orders that would redirect every police car racing toward the cemetery, that would create a perimeter keeping civilians away, that would effectively place this entire section of ground under martial authority. Ryker watched this happen, watched his world collapse in real time. Wait, no, you can't just, this is American soil. You can't just take over. I can't? Freeman's voice remained level, but something in it made Riker's protest die in his throat. Officer Ryker, do you know what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is? Not theoretically, not from civics class. Actually, no? Ryker said nothing. I am the highest-ranking military officer in the United States Armed Forces. I advise the President on all military matters. I command 4 million active duty and reserve personnel. When there is a credible threat to my life or liberty, response protocols exist that supersede local law enforcement jurisdiction. Freeman paused. You triggered one of those protocols. I didn't know. You were told. Repeatedly. Freeman's hand rose, touched the watch on his left wrist. This device monitors my vitals. Heart rate, blood pressure, GPS location, stress markers. When those vitals indicate a threat situation, assault, kidnapping, medical emergency, and no security override is entered within 90 seconds, it broadcasts an encrypted distress signal. Ryker stared at the watch. In the spotlight's glare, he could see it now. Not a consumer device, military hardware, ruggedized, with a small screen showing readouts he couldn't interpret. And that blinking red light, steady as a heartbeat. That signal, Freeman continued, goes to Strategic Command, to the Pentagon, to every military installation within 200 miles. It activates what we call the Sparta Protocol, immediate tactical response to protect or recover high-value personnel. The words landed like physical blows. Ryker's legs gave out completely. He sat down hard on the wet pavement, back against his patrol car, staring up at the old man he'd handcuffed and humiliated. The protocol assumes worst-case scenario, Freeman said. Assassination attempt. Kidnapping by hostile actors. It assumes I'm being taken against my will by people who mean me harm. His eyes locked onto Ryker's. Do you understand what you look like, officer? A man in uniform detaining me by force, refusing to verify my identity, throwing away my son's Medal of Honor? You looked exactly like a threat actor. But I'm a cop. That made it worse. Freeman's voice hardened. Much worse. Because now it suggests institutional compromise, corruption, potential conspiracy. The lieutenant's radio crackled again. Groundhawk, actual. FBI field office is requesting sitrep. They want to know if this is a federal case. Freeman closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, Ryker saw something there that made his bladder threaten to let go. Not anger, resignation. Tell them, Freeman said slowly, that I am unharmed, but that the situation is complicated. Complicated how, sir? Freeman looked down at Ryker, at this man who'd had every opportunity to avoid this moment and had ignored them all. Officer Ryker committed assault on a flag officer, made threats, destroyed military property, falsely arrested me. He paused. And he did all of it while I was visiting my son's grave on the anniversary of his death. The last detail hit differently. The lieutenant's professional mask cracked for just a second, his jaw tightening. Around the perimeter, several of the other soldiers shifted, their postures changing subtly. Still professional, still controlled, but different. Sir, the lieutenant said carefully, what do you want us to do with him? The question hung in the air. The helicopters maintained their hover, rotor wash constant. The spotlights never wavered. Somewhere in the darkness, the two soldiers continued searching for the Medal of Honor that Ryker had thrown away like garbage. Freeman rubbed his wrists again, looking at the marks, looking at his hands, looking old and tired and sad. I want my son's medal back, he said finally. I want to finish saying goodbye to him. And then he trailed off, staring past Ryker into the rows of white headstones. Then I want to understand how we got here, how an American police officer could do this at a national cemetery. A shout came from the darkness. Sir, found it! One of the soldiers emerged from between headstones, holding the Medal of Honor carefully in both hands, like the sacred object it was. He approached Freeman, came to attention, presented it formally. Freeman took it, held it, looked at the mud caked on the ribbon. His thumb traced the star. When he looked back at Ryker, his expression had changed, hardened. Lieutenant, he said quietly, place Officer Ryker under military custody. Read him his rights under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Ryker's voice came out as a whimper. You can't do that. I'm not military. I'm a civilian. You assaulted a flag officer, Freeman said. That makes it a federal case. And right now I'm invoking military jurisdiction. He turned away, dismissing Ryker like he'd ceased to exist. Get him out of my sight. Two soldiers moved forward, flanking Ryker. They didn't touch him yet, didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough. Ryker pressed himself harder against the patrol car, as if he could sink through the metal and disappear. "Wait!" His voice cracked. "Please, I have a wife, 2 kids. I made a mistake, but I can fix this. I can." "You had 60 seconds to fix this," Freeman said without turning around. "You had 90 seconds before the protocol activated. You had multiple warnings. You chose not to listen." The lieutenant stepped closer to Ryker, pulling a card from his vest pocket. "Officer Daniel Ryker, you are being detained under federal authority for assault on a military officer, unlawful restraint of military personnel, and destruction of military property. You have the right to remain silent." "I know my rights," Ryker's voice rose to a shout. "I'm a cop. You can't do this to me." "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, military or civilian, as determined by the Judge Advocate General. You have the right to an attorney." Ryker lurched to his feet, hands up, backing away. "This is insane. This is America. You can't just swoop in with helicopters and—" He didn't see the soldier behind him, didn't register the movement until hands gripped his arms, professional and irresistible, pulling them behind his back. Different handcuffs this time, military grade. The click echoed across the cemetery. "If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Do you understand these rights as I have explained them?" Ryker sagged in the soldier's grip, all fight gone. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I understand." Freeman finally turned back, still holding his son's Medal of Honor. "Lieutenant, I want a full investigation, not just into Officer Ryker, into his training, his supervision, his complaint history. I want to know if this is one bad actor or a symptom of something larger." "Yes, sir. I'll coordinate with the FBI and DOJ. And I want the local police chief here, now, before we move Ryker." The lieutenant spoke into his radio again, voice clipped and efficient. Around the perimeter, the other soldiers maintained their positions, weapons lowered but ready, professional, controlled. Men who'd been in actual war zones and found this situation disturbingly familiar. Freeman walked to his son's grave, knelt again in the same spot where Ryker had found him. He placed the Medal of Honor on the headstone, carefully, reverently. His lips moved in words no one else could hear. Behind him, Ryker sat on the ground between 2 soldiers, crying. Not the quiet tears of regret, the ugly, gasping sobs of someone who just watched their entire future collapse and couldn't process it. His career was over. His freedom was in question. His name would be attached to this incident forever. The helicopters maintained their hover, spotlights never wavering. In the distance, sirens approached more police units, responding to reports of military activity, not yet understanding that their jurisdiction had been suspended. Freeman's radio crackled with an incoming call. The lieutenant answered, then approached Freeman carefully. "Sir, the Secretary of Defense is requesting direct contact." Freeman stood slowly, joints protesting. He was 60 years old. He'd been kneeling in the rain for 20 minutes before Ryker arrived, another 10 during the confrontation. His knees ached. His wrists hurt where the handcuffs had bitten. He was tired in ways that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "Tell the secretary I'll call him in 10 minutes. I'm not finished here yet." "Yes, sir." A vehicle approached from the access road, a sedan, unmarked, moving fast. It stopped 30 yards out, blocked by soldiers. A man in a rumpled suit emerged, hands visible, moving carefully. The local FBI field agent, most likely, responding to the call. Freeman watched all of this happen with the detached calm of someone who'd spent decades in situations where lives hung on split-second decisions. This wasn't war. No one had been shot. No one had died. But it was a different kind of battle, one fought over principles and pride, and the question of who held true authority. He knelt one more time at his son's grave, touched the headstone. "I'm sorry, Marcus. This wasn't how I wanted to spend today. But you'd understand. You always understood about duty. When he stood and turned back to face the scene, the helicopters, the soldiers, the crying cop, the approaching officials, his face had settled into something harder, more final. Lieutenant, prepare to transport the prisoner. I want him held at Fort Meade pending formal charges. No bail, no civilian custody transfer. Sir, his union will fight that. The police will. Let them fight. Freeman's voice cut through the objection. What happened here tonight was an assault on the uniform, on the flag, on everything we're supposed to represent. I won't let it be swept away with an internal investigation and paid leave. He looked at Ryker one last time. The officer had gone silent now, staring at nothing, shock setting in. You wanted to know who I was, Officer Ryker, Freeman said quietly. You wanted proof. You're about to get more proof than you can handle. The police chief arrived in a patrol SUV, lights off, moving with the careful approach of someone who already knew this situation was beyond salvaging. Chief Margaret Dawson was 52, 28 years on the force, and she'd never seen military helicopters hovering over her jurisdiction like birds of prey. She stepped out slowly, hands visible, eyes taking in the scene with the practiced assessment of someone who'd walked into bad situations before. But nothing like this. Never like this. The lieutenant intercepted her before she got within 20 feet of Freeman. Ma'am, this is a restricted area, federal jurisdiction. I'm Chief Dawson. That's one of my officers. She nodded toward Ryker, still sitting between soldiers, face buried in his hands. I need to speak with whoever's in charge. General Freeman is in command of this operation. Dawson's face went carefully neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, understanding of just how catastrophically wrong this had gone. I'd like to speak with the general, please. The lieutenant looked back at Freeman, who nodded once. Dawson approached, stopped a respectful distance away. She dealt with military brass before, knew the protocol, knew when to defer. General Freeman, I'm Chief Margaret Dawson. I apologize for... How long has Officer Ryker been on your force? Freeman's question came without preamble, without pleasantries. Dawson blinked, recalibrated. 3 years. He transferred from... How many complaints? A pause. Too long. I'd need to check his file to give you exact... Approximate. Dawson's jaw tightened. 7 formal complaints in 3 years. 4 sustained, 3 unsubstantiated. Mostly use of force issues and allegations of bias. Bias. Freeman's voice was flat. You mean racism. The investigations didn't conclusively... Chief Dawson. Freeman turned to face her fully. Your officer just assaulted me at my son's grave. He handcuffed me. He threw a Medal of Honor into the mud. He refused multiple opportunities to verify my identity, to call for supervision, to de-escalate. And according to you, he's done variations of this at least 7 times before. Dawson looked at the ground. I understand how this looks, but how it looks? Freeman's voice rose for the first time, not shouting but carrying weight that made everyone in the cemetery go still. Chief, I'm a 60-year-old black man in civilian clothes. Your officer saw me and assumed I was homeless, assumed I was trespassing, assumed I was lying when I told him the truth. He didn't see a grieving father. He saw a threat, a criminal, someone beneath him. He stepped closer. Now tell me, Chief, if I'd been white, if I'd been wearing a suit instead of a rain jacket, would Officer Ryker have kicked me? Would he have handcuffed me? Would he have thrown my son's Medal of Honor into the mud? Dawson's silence was answer enough. Freeman nodded slowly. That's what I thought. So here's what's going to happen. Officer Ryker is going into federal custody. Tonight. No bail. No union protection. He's going to be charged under federal statutes for assaulting a military officer. General, please, the union, the department, they'll fight this. This could cause a scandal? Freeman's laugh was bitter. Chief, the scandal is that this happened at all. The scandal is that a man with 7 complaints was still on patrol. The scandal is that I have to explain to my son's memory why someone thought it was acceptable to desecrate his grave. Dawson tried again. If you'll just give me time to conduct an internal investigation? Freeman's voice went cold. How many of those 7 complaints resulted in meaningful discipline? How many led to retraining or suspension or anything that might have prevented tonight? Dawson said nothing. That's what I thought. Freeman turned back toward his son's grave, dismissing her. Your department failed, Chief. Failed me, failed this community, and failed Officer Ryker by letting him believe he could operate this way without consequences. The FBI agent had been cleared through the perimeter and approached now, badge out. General Freeman, I'm Special Agent Torres, FBI. I need to take a statement and coordinate Agent Torres. Freeman didn't turn around. How familiar are you with the Civil Rights Act, federal hate crime statutes, and the laws regarding assault on military personnel? Torres paused, reassessing. Very familiar, sir. Good, because this is going to be a federal case. All of it. I want the full weight of the Justice Department on this. And I want an investigation into this police department's hiring and training practices. If Ryker is a symptom of systemic problems, I want them exposed. Sir, that's a significant escalation. Escalation? Freeman finally turned, and his face held something terrible. Agent Torres, I am the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I have commanded men in combat. I have briefed presidents. I have sent soldiers into harm's way, knowing some wouldn't come home. And tonight, in my own country, at my son's grave, I was assaulted by a police officer who saw my skin color before he saw my humanity. The words fell like hammer blows. Torres nodded slowly. Understood, sir. I'll coordinate with DOJ immediately. Ryker made a sound something between a sob and a moan. All eyes turned to him. He looked up, face blotchy and wet, snot running from his nose. I'm sorry, he gasped. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. If you'd known I was a general, you would have treated me with respect. Freeman's voice cut through Ryker's apology like a blade. But you didn't know, so you treated me like garbage. That's the problem, Officer Ryker. You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you did it to someone who had the power to destroy you. Ryker opened his mouth, closed it. No words came. Freeman looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd had every advantage of authority and uniform and had used it to inflict humiliation on a grieving father. If I'd actually been homeless, Officer Ryker, if I'd been the vagrant you thought I was, would that have made it acceptable? Would it have been okay to kick me, to handcuff me, to throw away something precious? No answer, just silence and the thump of helicopter rotors. That's what I thought. Freeman turned to the lieutenant. Get him out of here. I don't want to see his face again. 2 soldiers lifted Ryker to his feet, began walking him toward one of the Blackhawks. His legs barely worked. They half carried, half dragged him across the wet grass, past the rows of white headstones, past the flags hanging limp in the rotor wash. Chief Dawson watched her officer being taken away, her face a mask of professional neutrality, barely concealing devastation. Her department would be under federal investigation. The lawsuits would be catastrophic. Her career might not survive this. Freeman knelt at his son's grave one final time, placed his hand on the cold marble. I'm sorry you had to see this, Marcus, but you'd have wanted me to stand up. You always did. He stood, bones protesting, and walked toward the waiting helicopter. The FBI agent fell in step beside him, already on his phone coordinating with Washington. The lieutenant maintained position, protective and professional. Behind them, the cemetery fell quiet, except for the sound of Chief Dawson trying to explain to arriving officers why one of their own was being loaded onto a military helicopter in handcuffs. The answer was simple, though none of them wanted to hear it. Because he'd earned it. Freeman didn't board the helicopter immediately. He stood at the open bay door, one hand gripping the frame, looking back across the cemetery. The spotlights still blazed, turning the rows of white headstones into an army of pale sentinels bearing witness. Chief Dawson approached again, more desperate this time. "General, please, let me handle this through proper channels. Ryker will be prosecuted, I promise you that. But if you take him into military custody, it'll create a jurisdictional nightmare. The courts will... The courts will do exactly what the law allows." Freeman's voice carried over the rotor noise. "And the law is very clear about what happens when someone assaults a flag officer." "He didn't know you were..." "That's not a defense, Chief. It's the entire problem." Freeman turned to face her fully. "Your officer didn't verify my identity because he didn't think he needed to. He looked at me and decided he already knew everything worth knowing. That's not a mistake. That's a choice." Dawson tried a different approach. "Think about the optics, sir. The military swooping in, taking a local officer, it'll look like overreach. It'll look like you're using your rank to... To what? To demand accountability?" Freeman's expression hardened. "Chief, your department had 7 chances to correct Officer Ryker's behavior. 7 documented complaints. 7 opportunities to retrain him, discipline him, or remove him from patrol duty. You failed. All 7 times. So yes, I'm using my rank. I'm using every bit of authority I have to ensure this doesn't happen to someone else." He gestured toward the cemetery around them. "Every person buried here wore the uniform, swore an oath. Many of them died defending the principles this country claims to stand for. And tonight, at their resting place, your officer decided those principles didn't apply to me because I didn't look like his idea of someone worthy of respect." The words landed like physical blows. Dawson's face went tight, professional mask cracking. "What do you want from me, General?" "I want you to understand the magnitude of what happened here." Freeman's voice dropped, forcing her to lean in to hear over the helicopters. "Officer Ryker didn't just assault me. He desecrated sacred ground. He dishonored the memory of every soldier buried here. And he did it while wearing a badge that's supposed to represent justice and protection." He paused, letting that sink in. "So here's what's going to happen. Ryker goes to Fort Meade tonight. Tomorrow, JAG officers will review the case and determine whether this falls under military or civilian jurisdiction. If it's military, he faces court-martial. If it's civilian, the FBI takes lead on a federal civil rights investigation. And if I fight this, if the Union, then you'll lose." Freeman's tone held absolute certainty. "Chief, I've spent 40 years in the military. I've navigated Pentagon politics, congressional oversight, international incidents. Do you really think a police union frightens me?" Dawson looked away, jaw working. Finally, "What happens to my department?" "That depends," Freeman studied her. "Are you going to protect your officer, or are you going to fix the system that created him?" Before Dawson could answer, one of the soldiers approached, holding something. Not Freeman's son's Medal of Honor that was already secured. This was different. A patch. The American flag shoulder patch from Ryker's uniform. "Sir, you asked us to recover this." Freeman took it, turned it over in his hands. The flag was slightly faded from wear, the edges frayed. Standard issue, worn by thousands of officers across the country, most of whom wore it with honor. "Where's Ryker?" Freeman asked. "Already secured in Groundhawk 2, sir." "Bring him back out," briefly. The lieutenant's eyebrows rose fractionally, but he relayed the order. A minute later, the soldiers emerged from the helicopter with Ryker between them. The officer looked worse than before, face swollen from crying, eyes hollow with shock, uniform disheveled. He moved like a man walking to execution. They brought him to stand before Freeman. Ryker couldn't meet his eyes, staring instead at the ground. Freeman held up the flag patch. "Do you know what this represents, Officer Ryker?" A whisper. "The United States. It represents a promise." Freeman's voice was quiet but carried weight. "A promise that all citizens are created equal, that justice applies to everyone, regardless of race, wealth, or status, that the law protects rather than oppresses. He paused. You broke that promise tonight. Riker's face crumpled. I know. God, I know. I'll do anything. You'll do what the law requires. Freeman looked at the patch again, at the red and white stripes, the field of stars. This flag has flown over battlefields where better men than both of us died defending what it stands for. You don't deserve to wear it. He dropped the patch on the ground between them, let it fall in the mud like Ryker had done to the Medal of Honor. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. Dawson made a small sound, protest or agreement, impossible to tell. The FBI agent stopped typing on his phone to watch. The soldiers stood a fraction straighter. Ryker stared at the fallen flag, then looked up at Freeman with something like horror. Please, my career, my family, I'll lose everything. You should have thought about that before you decided my son's grave was a good place to demonstrate your prejudice. Freeman's voice never rose above conversational level, but every word cut. You won't be prosecuted in civilian court, Officer Ryker. This won't be handled by your union lawyers or a sympathetic judge who gives officers the benefit of the doubt. He stepped closer. You assaulted a military officer in performance of duty. That's not a misdemeanor. That's not something that gets pleaded down to sensitivity training and probation. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, you're looking at a general court-martial. Riker's knees buckled. The soldiers caught him, held him upright, and if you're convicted when you're convicted, you won't go to county jail. You won't serve time in a minimum security facility where guards treat cops with professional courtesy. Freeman's eyes were ice. You'll go to the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth. Military prison, Officer Ryker, where the inmates are soldiers who broke faith with their oath. Soldiers who will have very strong opinions about someone who attacked a flag officer at a military cemetery. The color drained from Riker's face completely. Leavenworth wasn't just prison. It was a place where military discipline and prisoner hierarchy created something uniquely harsh, where someone convicted of assaulting a general would be at the absolute bottom of the social order. Take him back, Freeman said to the soldiers. I'm done looking at him. They dragged Ryker away. This time he didn't walk at all, legs completely gone, a keening sound coming from his throat that might have been words, but wasn't coherent enough to understand. Freeman watched until Ryker disappeared into the helicopter, then turned back to Chief Dawson. You asked what I want from you, Chief. I want you to remember this moment. Remember what happens when you ignore complaints, when you enable bad actors, when you prioritize protecting officers over protecting the community they're supposed to serve. He walked toward his own helicopter without waiting for a response. The Black Hawk's turbines spooled up, the whine building to a roar. Riker's screams cut through even that mechanical thunder, raw, animal sounds of a man watching his entire life disintegrate in real time. The soldiers strapped him into the jump seat with practiced efficiency, ignoring his thrashing, his pleading, the incoherent promises spilling from his mouth. I'll resign. I'll quit the force. Please, just let me go home to my kids. No one answered. The crew chief secured the bay door. Through the small window, Ryker could see the cemetery below, the rows of white graves, the spotlights creating pools of harsh illumination in the darkness. He could see Freeman standing beside the other helicopter, back straight, utterly unmoved. The helicopter lifted off smoothly, nose dipping slightly as it gained altitude and speed. Within seconds, the cemetery was a receding patch of light in an ocean of darkness. Ryker pressed his face against the window, watching his jurisdiction, his world, his life shrink and disappear. The soldier across from him, young, maybe 25, with a combat infantry badge and ranger tab, finally spoke. You should have listened to him. Ryker turned, wild hope flaring. You understand, right? It was a mistake. Anyone could have. No. The soldier's voice was flat. Not anyone. Most people, when someone tells them they're making a mistake, They stop and check. Most people don't throw a Medal of Honor in the mud. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. He leaned forward slightly. My platoon sergeant has one of those medals. He lost both legs getting it, threw himself on an IED to save his squad. You know what we'd do to someone who disrespected that medal? Ryker shrank back against his seat. Yeah, the soldier leaned back. You're starting to understand. The helicopter banked, heading northeast toward Fort Meade. Below, Maryland spread out in patches of light and shadow, towns where people slept peacefully, unaware that above them, a disgraced police officer was being transported to military custody. Unaware that in a cemetery somewhere behind them, a general was finally getting to finish saying goodbye to his son. Ryker closed his eyes, but that made it worse. Behind his eyelids, he saw it all replay. Saw himself kicking Freeman. Saw himself throwing the Medal of Honor. Saw the moment he opened that wallet and saw the ID card, and convinced himself it had to be fake because the alternative was too terrible to accept. Pride. That's what had done this. Pride and prejudice, and the absolute certainty that his badge made him right, made him powerful, made him untouchable. He'd been so wrong. Back at the cemetery, Freeman stood alone now. Chief Dawson had retreated to her vehicle, probably already on the phone with the department's lawyers, the mayor, anyone who might help contain this disaster. The FBI agent was coordinating with his field office, setting in motion the machinery of federal investigation. The second Black Hawk lifted off, carrying Ryker toward a future he couldn't have imagined an hour ago. Freeman watched it go, a dark shape against darker sky, navigation lights blinking red and green. Then he turned and walked back to his son's grave one final time. The spotlights had been switched off. The perimeter soldiers were withdrawing, their mission complete. The cemetery was returning to its natural state, quiet, dark, peaceful. A place for the dead to rest and the living to remember. Freeman knelt in the wet grass, placed the recovered Medal of Honor back on the headstone. His fingers traced his son's name carved in the marble. Marcus Isaiah Freeman, Staff Sergeant, United States Army, a good man who died too young doing something brave. I'm sorry I brought all that noise here, son, Freeman said quietly. You always liked the quiet. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and earth. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, probably another police unit responding to reports. Not yet understanding the situation was already over. Freeman stayed kneeling for a long time, longer than protocol required, longer than duty demanded. Just a father at his son's grave, saying the things that needed to be said. Private words, sacred words, the kind that don't get recorded in official reports or transcribed for public consumption. When he finally stood, his knees protested and his back ached. 60 years old, soaked through, exhausted in ways that sleep wouldn't fix. But there was work ahead, phone calls to make, reports to file, a system to shake hard enough that maybe, it would change. He walked toward the remaining helicopter, each step deliberate. Behind him, the cemetery settled back into silence. The graves stood in their perfect rows, bearing witness to what had happened, to what would come next. The dead kept their counsel, but the living would have to answer for tonight. Freeman climbed into the helicopter, accepted a headset from the crew chief, and gave the order to lift off. As they rose into the night sky, he looked down one last time at the cemetery below, at his son's grave, at the place where Officer Daniel Ryker had made the worst decision of his life. Then they turned toward Washington, toward the Pentagon, toward the machinery of justice that Freeman would now set in motion with the full weight of his authority. The cemetery disappeared into darkness. Ryker was somewhere ahead of them, being transported to Fort Meade. Within hours, he'd be processed, photographed, fingerprinted. He'd be assigned a military attorney. He'd begin to understand the magnitude of what he'd done and the impossibility of undoing it. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, Freeman had one more task. He pulled out his satellite phone, dialed a number from memory. Mr. Secretary, this is Freeman. We have a situation that requires your immediate attention. And far below, in holding cells, in police stations, and union offices across the county, people were starting to realize that something had shifted, that a line had been crossed, and there would be no walking it back. Officer Daniel Ryker had wanted to enforce the law. Now he'd learned what it felt like when the law enforced itself on him. 3 days later, Freeman returned to the cemetery. Alone this time. No helicopters, no soldiers, no spotlights turning night into day. Just a father and his car, and the long walk from the parking area to Section 60, where the recent dead lay beneath stones, still white and clean. The sky was clear, early morning, the kind of light that made everything look softer, kinder. Dew covered the grass, soaking through Freeman's shoes as he walked the familiar path. He'd made this walk dozens of times over the years, sometimes in uniform, sometimes not, always alone. He carried a small wooden box under his arm. Marcus's grave looked the same, white marble, standard issue, his son's name and dates and rank carved with precision. An American flag planted beside it, fabric hanging limp in the still air. Fresh flowers from someone, probably Marcus's old squad. They came every month without fail. Freeman knelt slowly, joints protesting less today. The ground was dry, the mud from 3 nights ago absorbed back into the earth. He set the wooden box down, opened it carefully. Inside, cushioned on blue velvet, lay the Medal of Honor. He'd spent 2 hours yesterday cleaning it, not just wiping away mud, but polishing every surface until the bronze star gleamed, until the ribbon's blue silk showed no stains, making it perfect again, making it worthy of what it represented. He lifted it from the box, held it up to catch the morning light. The star's points were sharp, precise. The profile of Minerva in the center gazed outward with classical serenity. Above it, an eagle clutched the ribbon, wings spread in eternal vigilance. Marcus had been 23 when he earned this, 23 when he saw a grenade land among his squad and made the calculation that his life was worth 7 others, had made that calculation in less than a second and acted without hesitation. Freeman's hands shook slightly as he placed the medal on the headstone. Not permanently, it would go home with him today, back to its display case where it belonged. But for now, for this moment, it needed to be here, needed to rest where Marcus rested. They cleaned it properly at the conservation lab, Freeman said quietly, used techniques they reserve for Smithsonian pieces. Said it'll last another 100 years now. He smiled slightly. More than you got, son, but then you burn brighter. A bird called somewhere in the cemetery, morning sounds filtering back into this place that had been torn apart by rotor wash and shouting 3 nights ago. Nature reasserting itself, covering over the disruption. Freeman reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. The initial charges against Ryker, delivered yesterday by a JAG officer with an expression of grim satisfaction. Assault on a flag officer. Deprivation of rights under color of law. Destruction of government property. The list went on, each charge carrying years of potential prison time. The union had already released a statement calling the charges excessive. The police chief had resigned. The mayor was facing recall efforts. The FBI had opened investigations into 4 other officers in the same department. None of it brought Freeman satisfaction. None of it felt like victory. You would have handled this better, he told his son's grave. You always knew how to be angry without being cruel, how to fight without hating. He paused. I'm trying, Marcus, but I'm tired. So tired of having to prove I deserve basic dignity. The sun climbed higher, burning off the dew. The cemetery was waking up. Groundskeepers starting their rounds, other visitors arriving to pay respects. Life continuing around the dead, the way it always did. Freeman stood, knees protesting again. He was getting old. Another 5 years and he'd retire, pass the chairman's position to someone younger, someone who'd grown up in a slightly less broken America. Maybe that person would have an easier time. Maybe not. He came to attention, back straight, shoulders square, raised his right hand to his brow in a salute sharp enough to pass inspection at any parade ground in the world, held it for a 5 count, then dropped it precisely. Rest easy, son. Your honor is restored. He picked up the Medal of Honor, returned it to its box, and closed the lid with a soft click. Looked one more time at Marcus's name, carved in stone. Tried to remember his son's laugh, the way he'd looked in his dress uniform at graduation, young and proud and certain he'd make a difference. He had made a difference. 7 men alive because of him. 7 families unbroken. That counted for something. That counted for everything. Freeman turned and walked back toward the parking area. Behind him, the grave remained. The flag stirred slightly in a breeze that hadn't been there moments before. The flowers bent and straightened, and in the distance, barely audible, the sound of a bugle playing taps at another funeral, another family saying goodbye to another soldier. The cycle continuing. The cost of service paid again and again by people too young to know better and too brave to refuse. Freeman reached his car, placed the wooden box carefully in the passenger seat, started the engine, sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. Then he put the car in gear and drove away from the cemetery, back toward Washington, back toward the work that never ended. The fight for dignity, the struggle for justice, the endless, exhausting battle to make the promises of the flag mean something real. Ryker would face his judgment. The system would grind forward. Changes would be demanded, some implemented, some forgotten. And Freeman would continue serving, continue leading, continue trying to make his son's sacrifice mean something beyond a medal in a box. The cemetery receded in his rearview mirror until it was just another patch of green among many, indistinguishable from the landscape around it. But Marcus remained, would always remain, in stone and memory, and the unfinished work of making America worthy of the men and women buried beneath its soil. 6 weeks later, a convoy of unmarked federal vehicles arrived at the police department's headquarters. FBI, Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. Inspector General from Homeland Security. They came with warrants, subpoenas, and the kind of institutional authority that made local officials go pale. Freeman wasn't there, didn't need to be. He'd set the machinery in motion, and it ran without him now, powered by laws and regulations and the accumulated weight of federal oversight. From his office in the Pentagon, he received updates, read reports, signed authorizations for expanded investigations. The initial audit of the police department revealed what he'd suspected. Ryker wasn't an aberration. He was a symptom. 7 complaints against him, but 23 complaints across the department in the same 3-year period. Patterns of excessive force, patterns of racial bias, pawns of supervisors minimizing incidents, protecting officers, prioritizing department reputation over community safety. The hiring practices were examined, background checks that missed red flags, psychological evaluations that rubber-stamped candidates who shouldn't have been given badges, training programs that emphasize control and compliance over de-escalation and community engagement. Chief Dawson's resignation hadn't been enough. 3 captains followed her out. A lieutenant who'd overseen Ryker's evaluation, 2 training officers who'd signed off on his performance reviews despite documented complaints. They left quietly, with severance packages and non-disclosure agreements, but they left. The union fought every step, filed injunctions, held press conferences claiming federal overreach, portrayed Ryker as a scapegoat, a good cop who'd made one mistake against a general who was abusing his power for revenge. The narrative didn't hold. Too many witnesses, too much documentation. Video footage from cemetery security cameras showing exactly how Ryker had behaved, how Freeman had remained calm and compliant while being assaulted. The Medal of Honor thrown in the mud, that image made national news, and no amount of spin could overcome its visceral impact. Riker's court-martial was scheduled for October. His attorneys had tried arguing civilian jurisdiction, but JAG had been unambiguous. Assault on a flag officer in performance of duty fell squarely under military authority. The evidence was overwhelming. The outcome wasn't in question. What was in question was how many years? 10 minimum, possibly 20. At the United States Disciplinary Barracks, where military prisoners served hard time under conditions that made civilian prisons look comfortable, Riker had lost everything already. His job, obviously, his pension, forfeited under the terms of his indictment. His marriage, his wife had filed for divorce within 2 weeks, taking the kids to her mother's house 3 states away. His house heading toward foreclosure. His reputation destroyed beyond any possibility of rehabilitation. He'd become a cautionary tale, a warning. The cop who thought his badge made him untouchable and learned otherwise in the most brutal way possible. Freeman received one request from Riker's attorney, a letter, formal and desperate, asking if the general would consider showing mercy, would consider advocating for reduced charges or civilian prosecution or anything that might spare Riker from military prison. Freeman read the letter once, then filed it without response. Mercy was for people who showed remorse before consequences arrived, not after. Mercy was for people who'd made genuine mistakes, not deliberate choices repeated across years of complaints and warnings. The investigation expanded. Other departments in the county, shared training facilities, regional task forces. The Inspector General was pursuing what he called systemic analysis, looking for patterns that crossed jurisdictional boundaries, that suggested cultural problems rather than isolated incidents. It was the kind of investigation that could take years, that could result in consent decrees, federal oversight, mandatory reforms. The kind that changed institutions from the inside out, that ripped out rot at the root and replanted something healthier. Freeman had seen it before in military contexts. Units that had developed toxic cultures where abuse was normalized and complaints were buried. The fix was never easy, never quick, but it was necessary. Because one bad unit could poison an entire command, could get people killed, could betray everything the uniform was supposed to represent. The same logic applied here. One bad department could terrorize a community for years, could destroy trust between citizens and police, could create situations where someone like Freeman, a decorated veteran, a flag officer, a man who'd spent his life in service, could be assaulted at his own son's grave because he had the wrong skin color and the wrong clothes. That couldn't stand, wouldn't stand. Not while Freeman had the authority to prevent it. He picked up his phone, dialed a number he'd called a dozen times in recent weeks. Inspector General's office. This is General Freeman. I'm authorizing expansion of the investigation to include all law enforcement agencies that share training facilities or mutual aid agreements with the original department. I want a comprehensive review of hiring, training, and disciplinary practices, root and branch. A pause on the other end, then, "Sir, that's going to be extensive. Multiple jurisdictions, significant resources." "I'm aware. Do it anyway. If we're going to fix this, we fix it completely. No half measures." "Yes, sir. I'll have the expanded scope on your desk by tomorrow." Freeman ended the call, sat back in his chair. Outside his window, the Pentagon sprawled in its massive geometric perfection, housing the apparatus of American military power. Inside these walls, decisions were made that shaped the world. Wars planned and executed, peace negotiated and maintained. But none of that mattered if a general couldn't visit his son's grave without being assaulted by the people sworn to protect him. The work would continue. The investigations, the reforms, the slow grinding wheels of institutional change. Riker would face his judgment. Others would follow. And maybe a message would be sent that badges didn't grant immunity from consequences, that authority came with responsibility, that the powerful had to answer to the law just like everyone else. Freeman pulled out the wooden box from his desk drawer, opened it. The Medal of Honor gleamed under fluorescent lights, perfect now, restored. He touched it once, briefly, then closed the box again. "We're not done yet, Marcus," he said quietly to his absent son, "but we're getting there." Officer Daniel Ryker had thought he knew what power looked like, had thought it was a badge and a gun and the authority to demand compliance, had thought it meant never having to answer for his actions, never having to respect people he considered beneath him. He'd learned different, learned that real power was quiet, was patient, was the kind that didn't need to shout or threaten because it could simply act, could set forces in motion that were unstoppable once begun. He'd learned that the most dangerous men are often the quiet ones, the ones who kneel at graves in the rain, the ones who give warnings instead of threats, the ones who wait for you to make your choice before showing you the consequences. Ryker had made his choice. Now he'd live with it for the next 20 years, in a military prison where every day would remind him of the honor he'd disrespected and the uniform he'd betrayed. Justice wasn't always immediate, but it was inevitable, and it remembered